Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Brent Cobb called Providence Canyon. So I'll freely admit, I regret not talking about Brent Cobb sooner. But in all due fairness to myself, I can imagine a lot of folks may be overlooking him. The cousin of acclaimed indie producer Dave Cobb, and primarily a songwriter behind the scenes, he got the attention of the indie country scene by satirizing bro country back in 2015 with the song Yo Bro. But he came to much greater attention thanks to his appearance on the compilation album Southern Family a year later, which remains one of the best records of the 2010s and one of the very few I have ever given a perfect score. Yes, it's a classic in the making. And yet, even with all that, Brent Cobb seemed to slide into the background. I mean, I really liked his detail-rich, earthy songwriting, but the guy had the misfortune of being placed in the track order between Jason Isbell and Miranda Lambert, who both delivered much more impressive songs. But you know what? In digging into his 2016 record, Shine On Rainy Day, I came to realize that unassuming, low-key charm was less a bug and more of a feature of Brent Cobb, primarily acoustic, with the sort of rough scrabble detail and texture in his lyrics that reward a lot of repeated listens to really sink into that vibe. And vibe is a key qualifier, because while there are a few exceptions like the excellent South of Atlanta and Let the Rain Come Down, that record was perhaps a little bit too low-key for its own damn good, comfortably riding the firm bass, the hints of smokier guitars and rich acoustic warmth to really kick up a groove, just a little bit too slow. The sort of background music that brought a ton of welcome texture and would definitely be an underrated gem for folks who like their indie country, but amidst an avalanche of excellent country records in 2016, it's no surprise that that project might have faded to the background, even for me. Well, not quite the case in 2018, and if the buzz was true and Brent Cobb had cranked up some of the tempos to lean into the southern Georgia funk influences that had been lurking beneath some of his sound for some time, we could have something that's pretty unique and interesting with this project. So, alright, what do we get on Providence Canyon? Well, honestly, this record is deceptively tricky to talk about. And indeed, there might be a part of me thinking that it might be best to place us on the trailing edge, because after the first half dozen or so listens, it didn't seem like there was a lot to discuss here. But the odd thing about Providence Canyon is that while you could simply describe it as a more upbeat, more southern fried, groove-driven indie country album, that description in and of itself does place it in its own subcategory of indie country right now. Not so much leaning on the Muscle Shoals sound, but something closer to a Leonard Skinner record from the mid-70s with a bit of a modern update. And yet, even with that, I would kind of struggle to call this a great record. It's definitely a good one, for sure, with a fair amount of personality, but I can't help but feel that it's missing that special factor to really put it over the top. It's definitely a good album, I'll say it again, but not quite a great one. And honestly, it's a little tough to put one's finger on exactly where that is. So, alright, let's start off with Brent Cobb himself. Now, to his credit, with the firmer grooves and the quicker tempos, he has to play more of an active presence in these songs, and he proves plenty capable. His vocal timbre doesn't exactly have a lot of body and can feel a little bit nasal at points, but it matches the general ambiance that Cobb presents, never quite leaning into the extremes of emotion and letting more just hang in the subtext than the outright text. And it helps that he leans into his bluntly self-critical side as well, comfortable being the guy on the sidelines, sketching out the story around him that somehow will consistently get laid every single night regardless, with a sort of wry, easygoing charm just to feel out the room and see what happens, for good or ill. Hell, the angriest he gets is on 30-06, and that's more on a level threat at somebody accusing his wife of cheating, or his slap against those selling out in the music industry to get ahead on When the Dust Settles. And even on that song, it's more exasperation and the sure knowledge he will just outlast all of them by the end. Now, granted, I'm not always certain the multi-tracking flatters him on these songs, especially when his delivery gets more conversational on tracks like Ain't a Road Too Long, along with a cadence that can feel just a shade bit awkward at points, especially that second verse, but that's more conversation surrounding the production from Dave Cobb, where Providence Canyon is the most immediately distinctive. And I'll admit a little bit surprised when we got to songs like Morning's Gonna Come, where the bass groove and that percussion line is the most pronounced and sharp you'll hear outside of hell, funk, or R&B. I made an early comparison to Leonard Skinner, and you can definitely hear the same creative DNA between this and their mid-70s work before the plane crash, accented by sharper, developed guitar phrases, the acoustic support, and hints of saloon piano and some organ in order to flesh out more of that melody. And when this album leans into those boogie rock grooves, you get some pretty impressive results, from the much more kinetic, explosive drums on 30-06 to the smoky barroom hookup of Sucker for a Good Time. And hell, even some of the mid-tempo songs like Come Home Soon and High in the Country, they feature a lot more of a pronounced bass groove than you'd ever expect emphasized by a producer like Dave Cobb, especially given his previous work. But this is where we're going to have to start encountering some issues, as you would expect, and Dave Cobb on production might as well be the first. Look, I'm a fan of the guy, but I got criticisms. And to be blunt, as much as I think he does a good job fleshing out the groove on this project, the electric guitar tones, they really don't carry that same sort of fire to do them proper justice, which really hurts them on the guitar solos. And songs like Lorena, they are crying out for a great fiddle line you know Cobb could deliver. And as much as this record straddles the line between country and southern rock, it doesn't quite commit fully to either genre, and that can hurt some individual songs. They could be a little bit stronger. Then there are the compositional moments that feel interesting in concept, but a little bit underwhelming in some of the execution. Most notably, a tempo shift midway through If I Don't See Ya to something that's more sultry and low-key, a little slower. And then Cobb introduces this lo-fi shift for the outro that doesn't really add a lot to the song. And on the flip side, there are moments that can feel almost too conventional. Sure, I might like the straightforward snarl of King of Alabama, but the title track ahead of it might be almost a little bit too sedate, and I found myself wishing for the compositional experiments of like Let the Rain Come Down from the last album. Although, on the topic of Shine on a Rainy Day, this record does have the same abrupt ending that album did, and which is honestly a little bit surprising. You'd think they would have rounded that off. But really, if I'm being honest, most of these issues are aesthetic nitpicks. The production and the compositions, they are solid. And this record keeps a pretty brisk clip and clocking in around 40 minutes, so is it the lyrics that are the issue? Well, yes and no. On the one hand, Brent Cobb is a little bit more reflective and self-aware, and that means songs like Morning's Gonna Come and Sucker for a Good Time, they provide plenty of detail of the incoming disasters when he inevitably wakes up in yet another woman's bed. Another thing that makes some of the posturing of 30-06 a little bit hard for me to buy into. Even if the groove does enough to really compensate, it's a great song regardless. And I do like how reasonable he is on a song like Lorena in appreciating that she has to go on beyond him and leave town, and he cherishes what they had in that moment. Or High in the Country, where he acknowledges his own lack of focus contributing to the breakup. Or the anxiety of Come Home Soon, where not having his home base back in Georgia leaves him to stray into his vices, specifically alcohol. And I do like the underlying attitude of the writing. It's laid back and observational, but not cynical or condescending. And at least the songs like the tribute to the late Wayne Mills on King of Alabama, who was shot by a friend, but it almost becomes a passing detail in the greater, brighter story of the man's life. But at the same time, it can make the record feel a tad bit slight overall, from the feeble deflections of Sucker for a Good Time. Dude, don't play it here. It's definitely your fault you nailed this guy's girl and you're meeting him in the morning, to the unlikely hopes that the girl will return on If I Don't See Ya, where she's likely long gone, and really you know that. But when you realize that he's likely moving on just as quickly from those hookups, it can get a little bit tough to get more invested, especially as you get the feeling that those grooves are going to keep him moving along regardless. But as a whole, this is a really solid enough indie country album, defining a deeper niche, blending in funkier southern rock with an easygoing vibe that might not stick more deeply for some listeners, but it's still plenty enjoyable while it's here. Again, I feel like there are points that are a tad slight in some of the songwriting, and they could have afforded to take a few more chances in the composition, and when I tack on some of the production quibbles I have, it does knock the record back a bit. But hey, Providence Canyon is still a fine listen for me, netting a light 7 out of 10, definitely a recommendation. Folks, this is going to fly under a lot of people's radars. Definitely worth your time if you want to give them a chance. Check this out. Fair bit of fun. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Not a lot to say about this one. Again, I was thinking about putting it on the trailing edge, but when it comes to sort of indie country, I want to give it a little bit of shine. So you want to actually buy the record, links down there below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious where the very few people have heard it, where you guys actually fall on it, because it is a distinctive tone in indie country. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support this channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. Want to see a schedule? It's on my Instagram, link below. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.